Why is growing your skillful use of adult learning transfer so critical to discipleship? Well, it's because it can help solve the failure of discipleship. Christian discipleship in America has largely failed. Fewer and fewer Christians are really Christian in their beliefs, attitudes, values, and lifestyle. Younger generations, well, they're running from the church. We've tried to solve the failure of discipleship through better speaking. The church has better produced, better delivered, more inspiring speaking, more readily accessible than at any time in history. And this is good. We need great communication. Yet discipleship continues to fail. We've tried different focal points. We've focused discipleship on cognitive transformation, biblical counseling, exegetical and expository preaching. We've focused on relational discipleship, Christian counseling, relational health and skills, topical preaching, and emotional health. We've focused on spiritual experience, spiritual practices, worship, Holy Spirit encounters, deliverance, and spiritual direction. And all of these things are good, and yet discipleship continues to largely fail. We've tried different venues, small church, large church, multi-site, church planting. We've done classes, seminars, intensive retreats, small groups, micro groups, coaching, and mentoring under various names for the last 50 years. Nothing is really new under the sun. Relational discipleship and the power of movements to reach people are essential. Still, discipleship has largely failed. We do better speaking, more holistic focal points for discipleship, and different venues for discipleship better in the last 25 years than in the decades before that. Still, discipleship is largely failing. Doesn't that raise serious questions in your mind? How do we erase discipleship's failure and begin to succeed? Could it be that we're trying to solve discipleship's failure by having our primary focus on the wrong core issue? It's not that these other areas of speaking, focus, and venue aren't valuable, important, one could even say essential. But what if the answer to the core issue of discipleship's failure is a process answer? What if the answer is mastering the process of adult learning transfer? Adult learning transfer is defined as taking knowledge, turning it into long-term memory, and then into something effectively put into practice in how someone lives. It's turning learning into changed lives. But what process leads to learning transfer in adults? Let's illustrate it using a thermometer. The colder it is, the less learning takes place. The hotter, the more learning takes place. The core of improving adult learning transfer is summed up in the difference between speaker-centered passive learning and participant-centered active learning. Speaker-centered passive learning decreases learning transfer. Participant-centered active learning greatly increases learning transfer. And yet the church, seminaries and Bible schools, and Christian discipleship and leadership seminars spend 70 to 90% of their time in speaker-centered passive learning. And when we see people talking in an interactive discussion, we get excited. But most often, the interaction is largely ineffective in creating learning transfer, and we don't realize it. More on that in part 2 of this video series. First, a quick aside. Increasingly, online training is taking center stage. I was having lunch with a wonderful Christian man who a few years ago was given the award of the top trainer in the world by the largest international training organization in the world. And I said to him, I'm really struggling to figure out how to effectively deliver good adult learning transfer online. How do you achieve high learning transfer in the online setting? He burst out in laughter. And then he said, you don't. Even the best online training has such low learning transfer, I negotiate to do it all in person. Now, certainly, online learning is here to stay and a tool the church will use at some level, but it needs to be strategically used. Now imagine for a moment, the U.S. church spends more than $100 billion and over 1 billion hours per year delivering discipleship and leadership training that most experts in adult learning say yields 2 to 20% learning transfer, and most would say it's on the lower end of that spectrum. What if we spent that money and time using methods that resulted in 30, 40%, or maybe even higher learning transfer? Imagine the difference that would make in discipleship and solving the leadership pipeline deficit the church is facing. That change starts by learning to master the design and delivery of active, participant-centered learning experiences and diminishing our use of speaker-centered experiences. Now, some have said, well, where's the Holy Spirit in this? Let's just trust the Holy Spirit. And yes, we desperately need to be led by the Holy Spirit. So shouldn't your trust in the Holy Spirit start by learning how the Holy Spirit created us to learn and then wisely disciple people using those ways? You might be surprised to discover your view of Jesus expanding as you see how Jesus in the early church used these same adult learning transfer principles to turn learning into changed lives. If you found this video helpful, click the subscribe button on my YouTube channel. In part 2 of this video series, we will look at the learning process that leads to change and how we often misdiagnose learning taking place when it's not, or undermine learning transfer by doing things we think are good, but they're really ineffective. For more information, visit 5minutesToLead.com.